Welcome back to the STEM Career Accelerator. In today's lesson, I want to talk about the 5 traits of experts. When we start out in school, we don't necessarily have a framework for where we're going to go with our STEM degree. Most professors barely even have a comprehensive syllabus to chart the course of the semester, much less anyone charting the course of your career from the time that you're learning in school. But looking back at my career, if I just knew that these were the 5 traits of expertise, I could have been much more intentional with what I did. And it wasn't until my mid career that I actually started really learning about the psychology behind experts, what it is that expertise is really all about. And one of the first things that an expert needs to be good at is they have to be skilled in pattern recognition. And as a geologist, I get this. This is something that I have to do when I'm mapping any area. I have to look at the patterns in the landscape and figure out how they relate to the underlying geology and how that geologic history has been formed. The next thing that an expert needs to do is conceptualize problems based on foundational knowledge and principles, which really what that means is we have to know our stuff. We've really got to know the most basic parts of the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics related to the problems that we solve. We need to be able to conceptualize those problems, so break them down into their most basic concepts and relate those to the foundational principles in our discipline. We need to be able to determine solutions and plan strategies. Now, this isn't the same thing as being organized and scheduling out your day. This is actually about implementing the scientific method. This is about coming up with the strategy needed to design a product or a building or a service. This is about expertise. This is not just about solving a basic problem or coming up with a basic strategy for your week. This is a much more detailed process when it comes down to what an expert does. And the fourth trait of expertise is that we restate the problem in terms of its constraints, limitations, and uncertainties. Now, those 3 elements certainly relate to what we do when we're going through the scientific method and breaking down a hypothesis and testing that hypothesis. And when we try to look at how the experiment actually went, what didn't work out with it, what worked with it, and whether it went the way we anticipated or not, it doesn't matter. We still need to look for things like lurking variables. We still need to understand how our own thinking can constrain things, how our ability to observe things with our 5 senses can constrain things, and that ultimately everything that humans are involved with are uncertain. But we can quantify those uncertainties oftentimes, or at least we can classify them. The fifth thing is that we have to participate in the solution. No expert becomes an expert just by doing the first 4 things. You really become an expert by continuously applying these first 4 traits over and over and over and learning from that process of application. So we have to participate in the problems that we solve and in the solutions that we offer to solve those problems. I like to break those 5 traits down into 3 essential phases that an expert approaches in order to solve any given problem. So in the first phase we look at solutions, strategy, and ultimately breaking that down into a plan. This requires that we know the foundational knowledge and principles for our area of expertise, and that we're able to recognize all the patterns in order to come up with the strategy that is going to help to solve the problem, that's going to help to break the pattern or to move the pattern in a different direction, whatever it might be for the specific problem that we're looking at. And I call this the understanding the problem in detail phase. The next phase is about those constraints, limitations, and uncertainties. And this is about anticipating the future. So in the second phase, we have to anticipate the future. And when we look at the patterns, when we look at the concepts that we've related from our foundational knowledge and the foundational principles, then we're able to elucidate what the constraints, limitations, and uncertainties are. But those constraints, limitations, and uncertainties are really about the future. So what's constraining in the present is going to relate to outcomes in the future. What's limiting us now is going to relate to what's going to happen in the future. The uncertainties are involved are to anticipate how reliable our solution is in the future. And then ultimately, we're going to participate in the solution, and this is about taking action. So the three essential phases that an expert goes through in solving any problem is understanding the problem in detail. That's a key part. It has to be in detail. It's not just understanding a problem generally. And then we have to anticipate the future based on our understanding of the details of the problem, and then ultimately take action by implementing our plan and participating in the solution. So then the question is, well, how do I become an expert? And there's been some research into the concepts of how do you develop expertise? How does one become an expert? And I've tried to break this down into what I call a framework for developing expertise. And if you look at this chart on the right, this is actually an adaptation of a chart by Bloom and then later adapted by Erickson et al. This is published in the psychological literature. Essentially, what they put forward was a model that says that there are three phases of development towards adult expertise. I've enhanced that and said that there are actually four phases towards adult expertise. And the first one is the beginner phase. It's when we're in school, it's when we're an intern, it's when we're learning things. And then we become a deliberate practitioner. And deliberate practice is something that we're going to get into more and more as we continue to build our skills and go through the career accelerator. But take it at face value that deliberate practice is essentially about developing those career enhancing and career transforming skills and practicing them in an intentional manner. And then becoming a specialized professional is the next phase. And that's at the point that essentially we are able to basically take control of projects, that we are taking them from the beginning of the project to the end of the project, that we really are pretty much coming into our own as a highly specialized professional. And eventually that develops into expertise, where we don't even have to be involved from the beginning to the end of the project or product. We can essentially be called in at any phase. And because we are expert, because we've gone through the project phases so many times, or enough times at least, we can get in there and we can start solving things right away. And that is about eminent performance. That is the most esteemed and highest level of performance of a professional on the job. So this is a psychologically sound framework, and essentially it shows us a couple of intentional progressions, or a couple layers of intentional progressions. The first is that we need to learn foundational knowledge, and that's at the beginner phase. And then understand the applications. And understanding the applications of this knowledge is really about the purpose of our, our knowledge. Why did we learn this? How are we going to apply what we've learned so that it forms some purpose for us? This may not be the same as our deeper purpose, but it may actually be interrelated with our deeper purpose. And it's important to highlight this. And then we need to develop the primary skills, things like pattern recognition and problem solving. So understanding the scientific method, essentially. These happen in the student parts of our career, the intern parts of our career, and as we're forming that broad base of being a generalist, part of the T-shaped professional model. And then we get into deliberate practice. Once we've got the base for ourselves, the knowledge, understanding the applications, we've got some of those primary skills, then it's time to start developing a deliberate practice. That is when you become a specialist and an expert. There is something called the 10,000 hour rule. Now, It may not be true, it may be true. The reality is that the 10,000 hour rule has kind of been misconstrued. It was published in a couple of books. It's been written about in many articles. The reality is, if you go way back and drill down into the research, some of that research is the research I just presented in the 3 or 4 phase model by Erickson, Bloom et al. But the what's happened in more recent years is that it's been misconstrued, and that there were a lot of limitations, uncertainties, and constraints on those studies that were not put forward in analyzing and coming up with the so-called 10,000 hour rule. Nonetheless, a 10,000 hour rule is not that bad of a rule, because when you look at it, it's about 1,000 hours over the course of 10 years. And oftentimes it's said that experts are people who have at least 10 years of direct application and experience in a specialized body of knowledge. Some people like to measure expertise just on the basis that you can talk for 5 minutes in an intelligent manner about a subject. So some people would say that that is how you recognize whether somebody is truly an expert or not. So if you wanted to just pull me aside at a coffee shop and say, tell me about landslide hazard assessment, I could talk for well over 5 minutes ad nauseum in great excitement, because that is my area of expertise. And I've had over 27,000 hours of practice at becoming an expert in landslide hazard assessment. So if it takes 10,000 hours to develop expertise, does that mean that you can just sit in a chair for 10,000 hours looking at a computer screen or reading a book or playing with a Rubik's Cube and then suddenly you become an expert? No. It's really about what you do with that time that matters. And so you have to ask yourself, when you think that you're developing a skill, when you think that you're developing your career, when you think that you're working towards becoming a specialist and an expert, ask yourself, are you being intentional? Is your practice deliberate? Because these are the kinds of questions that if you're not asking yourself regularly and coming up with a substantial answer, then you are probably not going to get the benefit out of 10,000 hours that a real expert would. And it's going to take you longer to develop your expertise. All right. Thinking about 10,000 hours, right? In a given year, most of us have around 6,000 waking hours. This is going to vary by everyone individually, of course. And everyone has different lives and different responsibilities. And, you may be awake for 6,000 hours, but 4,000 of those hours may be taken up by family or other types of responsibilities. That's just the reality of it, right? But the truth is, too, is that, your progress to becoming an expert really depends on how you use these 6,000 hours. And if it takes 10,000 hours and you can pull 1/6 of your waking time away from all of your other responsibilities and your downtime, of course, because you need waking downtime as well. You got to take care of yourself. If you can pull 1/6 of that time away, 1,000 hours a year, then it'll take you 10 years to achieve the so-called 10,000 hour rule to expertise if you are practicing deliberately, if you are engaging in deliberate practice for those 1,000 hours each year for 10 years. So think again about, what are your skills? Look back at the skill set table. What skills are you missing? And how are you going to fill those gaps so that you can start charting your path to becoming a specialized professional, so that you can understand how you are actually going to develop your expertise so that it can be part of your career transformation plan. So you can go back to the step-by-step guide and go back to the skill set table, work through those exercises again, and start forming a picture of what your expertise will actually look like, and then putting together that plan so that in no time flat, you'll be able to start implementing that plan and be really on track to becoming the expert in the career that you want. I'll see you in the next session.